So I want the clutch assembly for the film advance, and the clutch assembly I'm going to use that graphite grease again. Run it around the inside of the clutch assembly. Find the right pliers. I've zoomed you in a bit so you can see this. The spring has a little tag on the top which drops into that notch on the centerpiece. Of course the camera's not focusing on that because it bloody wouldn't, would it? Drop that down on the table so you can see it. So there's a notch here and the tag on the spring must drop into that notch. And I've grasped that lightly in my crimp pliers, revolve that whole thing round, which pulling that spring into place as I go. Put the outside in place, drop it on. Is that spring shifted? It has. Why is that not popping in? No, I've got to do that again. Basically, you're just holding that spring compressed, like a ring compressor, really, I suppose. That's better. And there's my clutch assembled. It moves smoothly. It moves smoothly in one direction. It doesn't need to move at all in the other direction. I'll put some synthetic grease through the centre of that. Drop it into place in the top. Make sure it's engaged with my film spool below. And the bush here is the next piece to go on. There's a gear set on here, so I'm just going to apply a bit of grease there and attempt to force that into place. That looks good. Wipe through the centre with a bit of grease. This should drop into place. It does. And this is held in place with a shoulder screw on this side. On the other side we've got the ratchet pull. A spacer goes on first. There's the one side of that spacer has a countersink. That goes downwards. The plain side must be up. Put this little ratchet pull in place. Here's the screw it runs on. I just put a little smear of grease around the top of that where that pull runs. I didn't want any grease down the bottom because there's no advantage in greasing the screw threads. It would just encourage things to come loose. So I'll nip those two screws up. May have to alter the position of those yet, we'll wait and see. There's a spring goes on here. I'll zoom you back in for that. So you're going to focus. It's thinking about it. And I carefully laid these parts out. Of course I can't lay my eye. Find it now. Here it is. Here's the spring. There's a groove around the top of that screw head that that spring sits down into. And you can probably see the action of that. That's good. The gear goes on the top. First I want to run a bit of grease around the inside of that. See if I can position that correctly. If I rotate that anti-clockwise, it should push the ratchet fall out of the way as it goes. Yeah, it did. That worked fine. I've checked that the shaft is up. It is. Zoom me out a bit. That's good. The spring, I normally give them a bit of a wipe with grease. It doesn't really need to be greased. I do it because it's spring steel and it's prone to corrosion. So a little film of grease on there certainly will stop that. Let's put these pieces in place. There's that washer, that's most important. And I have my gear. I'm looking closely at this because I thought one of the teeth was damaged earlier. And to tell the truth, now that it's clean, it doesn't look like that's the case. Certainly that's fine that way up. Put that into place. And do the screw up. That part's done. Now back where I was with the sprocket shaft. Put the sprocket back in the back of the camera, drop the shaft down, flip the camera over, pull that catch back, close the front of the camera. Now I can revolve my shafts enough to line up the screw hole for the screw that drives the shaft, drives the sprocket. Yeah. Yes, that started with a minimum of fuss. And one was giving me grief the other day. Oh, that was on the 3C, I think. It gave me lots of trouble. So the rewind button needs to go on now. And the rewind button, first all I want to do is just apply a bit of grease to the spring. Have the rewind button, the spring on the shaft of the rewind button, then its washer, and that screws on the end of our shaft there for the sprocket. If I can get it to start. It's starting now. Make sure that catch is back out of the way. That seems to be good. Just wind that up tight. Check that it's good. That's fine. I haven't got the pliers that I usually use to tighten that up, but I have got these, so I'll just tighten it with that instead. That'll do nicely. So that's pretty good. At the base of the camera, I want to tension up the film advance now. Basically I'm just going to wind a turn of advance the whole shaft one full turn, which will tension up the film advance shaft, make it want to return to the park position. So I'll just rotate this clockwise, one full turn, drop the lock lever back in position. So that's tensioned now. As long as I don't touch anything at the top of the camera, that'll stay tensioned while I put the chrome trim on the base of the camera. And the chrome trim is held in by 7 small screws. You can usually tell these ones because they've usually got some residue of the glue on them. So in the interest of avoiding grief, I will get the 3 in at this end and get my film advance lever fitted so that the film advance shaft can't release and lose its tension that I've just carefully put on it. Now that lever is obviously going to need to be cleaned to get rid of that excess glue, but at the moment that'll do nicely because we just need to get this all together. Right, so the film advance lever is in place. I'm checking the action. This is the release lever that releases the film advance lever to allow you to wind again. This one here is the lock lever, the one at the back. If that's not depressed, you won't be able to move the film advance lever. It's designed to lock the film advance lever when the frame counter reaches number 1. That's all working nice and smoothly. I'll pop my screws in for the rest of that base plate now. I wanted to get the film advance lever on first because otherwise you've only got to bump the lock lever and it would release the tension on there and I would have to start again. Once I've put the cocking rack on the top of the camera, where did that one go? Got past me. I'll find a replacement for that screw or find the original in a second. But what I was going to say was once I've got the shutter cocking rack on the top of the camera, that will also prevent the film advance lever from winding down. So that's the next thing to do. And once that's all in place and working correctly, well, there's that screw I wanted, then I can put the leatherette on the base of the camera. That part's good. So, shutter cocking rack. Now the chrome trim at the top of the camera needs to go on at this stage. So I better clean that up and put that in place. Here's the chrome trim. It goes on there. And the only thing that, it's held down by the strap lugs at both ends. So I'll put the film cassette end strap lug in place. I was going to say rangefinder end, but of course this camera doesn't have a rangefinder, it has a viewfinder right in the middle of the top plate. Loosen those 2 screws off. Hold the strap lug towards the end of the camera, right up against the screw heads, do the screws up. That should be fine. I've got my replacement shutter cocking rack here because the original was dead. So I'll apply a little bit of grease to this. Drop that in position. That should do. I'm going to test that and make sure that that will run the full distance. If it's too far advanced, it'll bang up against this chrome trim. You won't be able to complete the advanced stroke. So I'm just going to test and see if that's good or whether I've got to move it back one tooth. No, that's fine there, that's good. I can put the screw in at this side too. Hip those two up. There's a single screw holding the plate down here. This clamp plate keeps the rack firmly clamped down at this end. And we have the post here which guides the film release button. I'm checking the action, make sure there's no stiffness there. That seems just great. That seems absolutely good. So what I'm going to do now is just wind this most of the way across and check how much play I've got at this point. Make sure there's not too much backlash in those teeth, because that's where they'll cut out. And there is a little bit of backlash there, probably more than I would like. So in the first instance, what I'm going to try and do is move the entire bush on the top of the film advance shaft towards the back of the camera to close up that space. So I've got to remove my chrome trim here because it's tucked in underneath where I can't get at that screw otherwise. So I'm going to loosen that screw slightly and that one. Push the film advance over as far as it'll go. Do those two screws up. Have I achieved anything? Possibly. I'll take the rack out and see if I can squeeze a bit more out of that. This is just to ensure that the rack and the teeth on the top of that gear have a fairly minimal amount of backlash, because under load the rack tends to push away from the gear and then the load ends up being taken on the very tips of the teeth, and of course the very tips of the teeth are not strong. There are other workarounds for that situation where there's too much clearance. Let's better get this in the right position because I'm halfway through the stroke at the moment, so I can't tell where this needs to be. Right here. Just wind that forward a bit. Oh yeah, that's definitely done the job. That's definitely tightened that backlash up. Put my chrome trim back in place. You wouldn't normally be able to achieve it, of course, but if you had that too tight there, if you had the rack effectively too close to the gear so it was under preload or tension all the time, that would probably not be a good thing either, and the action would probably be noticeably rough. A bit of backlash is good. Too much backlash and that gear is going to fail. The teeth on the rack are going to fail typically. That's all very good. I'll put my strap plug back at this end of the camera. And this shutter cocking rack, I think, is the lucky last original Kodak spare part shutter cocking rack that I had. A number of years ago I bought a big parcel of parts and I had a number of shutter cocking racks. That's all looking good. I think I'll put the viewfinder on there now. But I don't have it in front of me. Where is it? It's over there. And the viewfinder has a piece of paper tucked under the back edge. Which serves to angle the viewfinder slightly downwards, very slightly. And I would say that that was done because they were worried that people were going to cut their heads off their people they were taking photos of. That being a time-honoured thing to do when you're taking photos is to point the camera too low, end up cutting people's heads off. Always very popular with box cameras, tricks like that. I'm just making sure I've got this nice and square to the body. He wants to come around a little bit there. It looks good. I want to close up this top cover now, I think. It's useful to have the top cover closed as quick as you possibly can so that this film advance shaft here, the shutter release shaft, doesn't get a chance to get away. Because it doesn't need any encouragement, it'll be gone. If it falls out, we'll be back with our original problem and I won't enjoy it. Put that in place, check the viewfinder to make sure I haven't managed to put a thumbprint on it. That's looking pretty good. The top cover. Put that in place. Now I'm checking to see how the frame counter works, and my rewind, my film release button there stuck down. I'll have to find out why. The frame counter is advancing far too many frames, so I've got the rack in a different position than it was previously, I would say. So I'm just going to wind that screw in a bit. The racks do vary a little bit too because it's just manufacturing tolerances. Still winding too far. See if I can wind that in a bit more. There's an adjustment here in the top cover for that frame counter. basically it's just pulling too far, so I'm backing the screw up. That's pretty good. I'll just back it up a little bit more, that should just be right. The big concern is not so much that it was centered on the numbers, I'm certainly going to achieve that. The first thing was it was just winding 2 frames at a time on the counter. And it is just about where it wants to be now. The line should just centre up in the notch there in the V. Like that. That will do for the moment. I'll close up the top of the camera with just a single screw at each end at this stage and fit the shutter. Now, of course, my shutter release shaft can't fall out and create a nightmare for me. So there's the body waiting for the shutter. We'll put that on. Check and see if that winds. Yes, it's moved, but it didn't move far enough to cock the shutter, so I've just got to advance that curved rack slightly. Probably there's a good place to start. That's good. I could hear that shutter, the cocking action of that shutter dropping into place as I was winding the film advance, and it was dropping into place just before the end of the film advance stroke, which is ideal. Now I've got to get my retainer ring started. This is easier on the Retina 2Cs and 3Cs because the rear lens element acts as a guide to the position of this. The retainer ring is above the height of the rear lens on a 1B. Right, so that winds and fires, that's all good. I'll just nip that retainer ring up tight. And at the base of the camera, and take off my film advance lever. That will have to be cleaned, but I need to glue my leatherette in place, so I need the glue. Right, apply some adhesive. And spread that out carefully. Trying to make sure I've got good cover right to the edges. Particularly this rough spot right here, because that's where it's got to glue down to that raised patch of leatherette stuck on the camera body. Let's flip that over. Need a bit more in places, so I'll just apply some there and transfer it to where it's needed, which is there. And right on the end there seemed a bit short. that looks good. Bring back the camera body. And fit the leatherette in place. Just make sure it's pressed down firmly into the corners and edges. Around a raised boss like that, it's always reluctant to press down firmly. That's pretty good. I want to get rid of that excess adhesive off the top there. Some leatherette is more susceptible to the solvent and the adhesive than others. It's often very hard to see that coming. I don't want the leatherette melting. That's good. I can see I've got to change this battery, so I'll do that and clean that advance lever. I'll just get rid of this adhesive and rubbish off this film advance lever. I'm using acetone to soften the adhesive here. It seems to be doing a pretty good job. One of the main reasons to get rid of the old adhesive is that you want a clean surface to glue to, so that you can be fairly confident that the leatherette will stay where it's put. Old adhesive like that may give up its grip at any given time, and then of course you'd have the lot coming off. If we start with clean metal and fresh adhesive, there's every likelihood it'll be there for some time to come. Let's get this lever started. That's it. Just tighten those screws up. And apply the leatherette patch, which will need a little smear of adhesive itself. I have cleaned the leatherettes, but they don't appear to be especially flat on the back. I know it's not the first time they've been off the camera. I suspect that they lost some thickness when they were being removed from the camera at some stage. That part's good. And if I put the back catch cover in place, that will be the base of the camera dealt with. So put the screw up through the cover. clip the spring into position between the screw and the lever, put that onto the camera, run that screw down, check the action, that's good. Put the other screw in, run that down, check the action again, it's all good. Tighten those two screws up. That's the base of the camera dealt with. At the top of the camera, what have we got to concern ourselves with now? Well, one is adjusting the point at which the shutter and the film advance are released. So I'm going to squeeze very gently on the shutter release, and I'm listening. That's the film advance releasing. I could wind it on again. So the screw on the top of the film advance needs to be screwed down slightly so that it releases slightly later in the sequence. So the adjustment is here, we'll just make that a quarter of a turn. I'll try that again. That's the film advance releasing again, and the shutter shortly afterwards. So let's just wind that down another quarter turn and try that. No, once more. Well, I've got that adjustment to my liking now. I think that'll do nicely. So if I drop my top cover in place, check it once more, that seems good to me, and I can put the screws in the top cover. The screws at this end are exactly the same size as the screws were on the base of the camera, except these ones are chrome plated. It's worth making sure that you can tell the difference between chrome plated and nickel plated, because if you can't, somebody else will, and they'll know that you've done a bodgy job of repairing the camera if nickel plated screws appear on the outside and chrome plated screws are visible inside. The film advance, the rewind rather, that can go on the top. That's just our cap. There was a spacer washer in here, which may or may not be necessary. That's job is to stop the rewind knob rubbing on the top cover when it's at its rest position. And I would say it's not needed in this particular case. We'll get rid of that washer. Yeah, that seems fine. So, here we have it. Our Retina Ib, all back together and going. Two serious problems it had. The first was that somebody had allowed the shutter release shaft to come out, and so that coupling in there had fallen in and was jamming the entire front mechanism and stopping the shutter from releasing too, of course. And the second was that the shutter cocking rack had basically failed. And in this section here, it's just chewed out pretty badly at this point. So there was no danger that that was going to advance and cock the shutter correctly. that was just a failed shutter cocking rack. And that was probably the original fault. Somebody went into it to see what they could do, took the top cover off, gave the camera a bit of a shake, the shutter release shaft fell out, tipped the camera back, work out what they've done. The other piece fell into the back, suddenly the camera wouldn't fold up anymore, and that would be the end of it. Of course, the other thing was, because it wouldn't close, someone pushed at it, which bent these arms, top and bottom, which meant that the door after that really didn't want to close anyway. It's fine again now. So that's a Retina 1B. I had a fair idea what the problem was there. I didn't know the shutter cocking rack had also failed. I thought it quite likely the shutter just needed serviced. But you find these things as you delve into them. So thanks very much for watching.